Back to Controlling Ideas. Today we are joined by Daire Hickey. Dara has had an incredible career, which has included co-founding Web Summit in Europe, Europe's largest tech summit. Before that, Dara worked as a journalist, having written for many of the top publications in Ireland. He also worked for RTE, the Irish national broadcaster. He is a 2016 Forbes 30 under 30 at WEF Global Shaper and on Friends of Europe's 40 under 40. He is also the co-founder of 150 Bond. Dara, welcome to Controlling Ideas.
Thanks, Dave. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Well, Dara, you clearly have a very entrepreneurial spirit. What has been the driving force for this?
Maybe realizing that I couldn't work for anybody else has been my main driving force. I think I could be sometimes a difficult person, and I think I've always just wanted to pave my own path. I think my kind of first entrepreneurial journey was renting out my videotapes in my kind of front yard as a kid, and then it kind of went from there. Selling cans of Coke in my front garden, all sorts of different things. And then when I left university, I was a freelance journalist. And I think that in itself is a pretty entrepreneurial endeavor. You've got to kind of realize the value of information. You also have to kind of realize how stories are told. And that is super, super helpful. And then from there, I set up Web Summit with two friends, Paddy Cosgrave and David Kelly. And we grew that from 0 people way back when to over 60,000 people when I left. So it's been a fun and interesting journey.
I mean, that is such an interesting journey. It's interesting that you brought up like the journalism element there. What within the journalist experience that you had about storytelling, have you been able to kind of apply to your work as like a startup founder?
Yeah, I mean, as a journalist, you're trying to think about like, what does the reader want to hear? You know, what are the most interesting kind of pieces of information, and how do I tell a particular story? So, you know, it's usually following, particular narratives, triumph over adversity, kind of following a narrative of the little guy done good, those kinds of things. So they're the stories that we were trying to tell. And I think having an idea of how newspapers work was super helpful for me in helping startups and helping other people pitch similar stories to newspapers. We were able to tell people, or I'm able to tell people, look, that's something that we think Forbes are going to write. That's something that we think this is more of a New York Times story, or this is more of a Vox story, or whatever it is. Because each of these publications has their own kind of particular bent. It has a particular way of writing. Forbes really likes to write about people and what happens to people in their personal journeys. Fortune likes to write about big ideas, so it's like more likely to write an AI story than Forbes is. And each of those kind of publications has, all of their own kind of idiosyncrasies. So that's been really, really helpful coming from a journalist point of view in telling people how to tell their story.
I love that. It's almost like adapting your own story based off of the audience. So the example there of Forbes and Fortune, it's like you're still coming from the same place, but it's very different stories and very different ways of telling them.
Yeah, and again, we're working with a client now, and they're a VC firm, and they really, really want a story in Forbes. So we're telling them, look, this is all about the color in your life. Like, let's tell the dramatic moments of, how you came to start your firm, how you sold your business, how you felt at the time. Like, they literally want to know, like, where were you when this happened? Like, what was going on in your life as you were going on this arduous journey to build your startup? How did that affect your relationship with your wife? Those kinds of things those human moments are really important to a Forbes reader. If you were talking to Fortune, they want to talk to you about like how you're trying to tackle and grapple with like the big ideas, like with AI, with blockchain, and like how you as a company is taking that sort of approach. So it's just a different focus. And some kind of people really enjoy talking about I guess like how they themselves have kind of come to the idea and like how the journey has affected them. And other people much prefer to kind of intellectualize about the big picture and the big idea. So sometimes we just have to choose the medium that kind of suits us.
I love that. And when you're advising C levels and entrepreneurs right now, like what kind of tips do you offer them to really help them define what their story is and like make sure that they get the right messaging across?
Yeah, I mean, we always tell people that you can't go into an interview or a session unprepared. You've got to have your kind of 3 to 5 North Stars. What are the kind of things that you should be sticking to in all of your messaging? What should be consistent across these? That's key. That's like super, super important, because if you don't know what it is that you want to get as an output, then you can't, build from there. I think that's the key thing. The other tips that we give are kind of basic tips around media training, which is that the interview starts when you walk in. It's like, being polite to the journalist and having done some research on, the journalist, what their interests are. And then I think it's really thinking about kind of something interesting to say. Do you have something interesting to say about the industry? Something kind of slightly provocative? Do you have a unique point of view? And showing thought leadership in that sort of space is super important. It's really important that what's happening in the broader industry. If you are a company and you're in one space, AI, blockchain, music, pottery, whatever it is, then you should have a view on the kind of broader industry and a view on kind of what makes you unique, what your kind of key differentiators are, and what your kind of thesis is. What is your drive as a company, your drive as an individual? So you've got to think about all of those things before you get to the point of the interview, or before you put your product out or anything like that. It's really important that you're very thoughtful and considered about those kinds of things.
What are some of the more common mistakes that you see people, even with like the advice that you give, like are there any common mistakes that you see people making when they're going into interviews, or if they're going into pitch for investment funding or anything else like that?
Yeah, I mean, not doing your homework is common. Just thinking that it's a casual chat, and sometimes even with a friend who might be an investor or something like that, people aren't prepared in the way that they should. You've got to treat these conversations like very professional business conversations. The other thing is overuse of jargon. While somebody might be in an industry, don't take it for granted that they will understand all of the industry jargon. It's really good practice to try and make your message as simple as possible. Think about your grandmother and how you would explain your company or your idea to them. And that is the kind of best way to get things across. Just thinking of the broadest possible audience. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, and people will use big words and jargon to show that they have an understanding of the industry, that they get the problem, to show the kind of journey that they've been on to try and fix that, using kind of technical words. But it really, really has a negative effect, and it's not helpful in ensuring a large group of people kind of understand something. And companies like Stripe, who do a really good job of their messaging, they are always talking about how do we de-jargonize this? How do we ensure that everybody understands what it is that we're doing? And a lot of what they're doing is very, very technical, talking about the movement of money and payments and APIs and that sort of thing. But they still do a really good job of essentially saying that we make payments simple. And there are lots of other great companies, probably any great company that you know. And I think Google is a really good example. I read the press release that Google put out, I think it was in 1999, one of the first kind of big press releases to launch the search engine. And if you read it, it's all written in plain English. They don't go into the details of the algorithm and how it works or anything. We make searching for information on the internet easy. And I think that's a good reminder to just kind of take a step back and think about how you make things super simple. I think it's George Orwell who says that, why use two words instead, when you can use one. I think that's a good point.
I love the comment about how to explain it to your grandmother. I think I'm going to steal that, especially whenever I'm talking to like tech companies. Because I know myself, like I'm staying with my girlfriend's family at the moment, and even just trying to explain the Amazon Fire that they have is a nightmare. So, um, I think that's a great tip and something definitely to keep in mind. For you as like an investor yourself, like what are the kind of things that you connect with when a startup is presenting to you or a founder approaches you?
Yeah, I think if you have a product, which a lot of people have, or a vision for a product, and maybe they've got some success with that, I think having your story straight, and having a thesis-driven mission, I think is super important. Why did you come to this? Why did you come to this problem? How did you solve this problem? Why are you the best person to take this company from where it is now to the next place? Those are the kind of key things that I like to understand, the kind of motivations, the things that get people kind of moving in the morning, things that show me that you're committed, that you are the best person for, this company.
That I really like that. I think the why and is so important. I know that um I always like say like Simon Sinek's like his TED talk on like just starting with your why is just so impactful. Um, so thank you for that, Dara. I know that like you are so busy, so thank you so much for taking out the time. Really, what is next for you, and like what are you working on at this time that you want to share about?
Um, I don't know. I think we're working with lots of really interesting companies. I'm trying to think of really interesting examples. We're working with this cool company called Soil Carbon Co. So essentially, they're extracting carbon from the atmosphere, which leads to climate change, and putting it in the soil, making the soil nutritious, and paying farmers to do so, and trying to help solve the climate problem, and doing something like that. It's a super interesting, big picture idea. That's one company that I'm super excited about. I talked to a really interesting entrepreneur yesterday who runs a healthcare company, just focused on children, and he just had the greatest story and the really interesting kind of vision for the future. So it's another company that I'm excited about. And then kind of final one is a big one for us. It's called Definity, and they're trying to build the internet computer, and a decentralized internet. So the idea that the internet wouldn't be ruled by 5 or 6 big companies, and that you would be able to kind of build directly on it, and an alternative to what we now see as a kind of an internet that's controlled by a handful of companies. So they're the companies that I'm super excited about, working with those guys.
That's fantastic. Well, Dara, thank you so much for taking out the time and giving your advice here today.
No problem. Thanks, Dave.